Alright, hello everyone, welcome back to the third session of minikube tutorial videos. In today's video, we're gonna talk about node type. So in the previous video, we created a Kubernetes cluster in minikube using Docker container, right? In our cluster, we had only 2 nodes, and then we deployed a kick-based image, a very simple dummy application. After that, we exposed our service using ClusterIP. Then we also showed you how to deploy or create more than one replica, right? That should be running all the time, at all time. And then we also talked about minikube services, port forwarding. End of the video, we demoed basically how ClusterIP works, right? This is going to be basically the continuation of previous video. So we're gonna continue where we left off. So kubectl, my hands are literally frozen, it's too cold. So, okay, we have 2 demo ports where our kick-based application is deployed, right? And it's running currently in there. So if I run kubectl rollout, and you could do a couple of things. You always do the tabs, right, on your computer, and you can say deploy, meant, and the name of the deployment. So here you can see it was successfully rolled out. So if you want to see the history, so you could actually see the history. And you can always type in the deployment, for example, demo. So this is going to be showing you basically the version, right? So if you wanted to fall back to, let's say, if we had 1 to 5 version, or you can call it revision, I'm calling version at this point, is the same thing. So technically you could fall back to revision number 1, revision number 2, 3, or whatever, right? From the latest deployment. So since we don't have any changes, we are not going to show you that in this video, maybe in the future videos, but I just wanted to let you know this is how you could do stuff. The other thing actually I want to look into is get SVC. And in the SVC, we had the cluster type, right? So if I wanted to convert this one to node port, either you delete this one and create the service again, or you could actually convert it, meaning that you could convert from ClusterIP to node port, and everything else remain the same. Okay, so to do that, I'm gonna copy this command, I have it already here, and paste it right here. So here what we could do, we could basically patch the type from cluster IP type to node port. So if you have noticed kubectl get SVC, this has been actually changed to node port. And one thing that you have seen different right now is this part. Before, when we had cluster IP, you can see we had 8080, nothing else was there. So now we have this node port IP. So what happens when you change to node port and you do not specify the port number? So Kubernetes will assign a port 767 in this range randomly, okay, for you. If you do not specify what would be the node port for this one. So this is how it actually works, okay, just to let you know. So this is what we have, and when you have node port, doesn't mean that I would be actually able to curl to my local host on this particular endpoint. Actually you can't, right? And if I change this one to 30611, look at this, you cannot. It's because this service is not exposed on your computers. We are talking about the internal IP of our computer, right? So you can actually access it using port forward. Okay, it's not there, so I have to write the command. So port forward, I'm gonna show you the picture in a second what this node port means, just in a second. So port forward to what? So we can say 127.0.0.1, and then from there is basically service is demo. You can actually port forward to this, right? So if I am going here and I'm saying curl, and then you just type in 127.0.0.1 and 8080, I should expect the response back, right? So you can see MSK is basically the pod. So I can just show you kubectl get pods. So MSK, you can see. So this pod is actually handling the request, right? Excellent. So you can see if you do the port forward, you can access it. The other way you could do, I talked about this in the previous video, but still I'm gonna show it to you if you're new to my channel. Okay, so here you could actually do this minikube service and demo. This is also actually doing the traffic routing from my computer to all the way to Kubernetes cluster. So now he's gonna go to DuckDuckGo, which is my default browser, and here you can see I'm able to access the service, right? So if I'm killing these, now I would not be able to access it anymore if I reload the page, for example. So notice this is here is a port that is actually randomly chosen by minikube, right? So this is also the same thing like port forwarding. They do the tunneling and takes care of the networking part. So this is what we discussed in the previous video as well, right here. So here we did the recap and we exposed the service using Node Port. So now we want to understand, we talked about the port forwarding as well. Now we want to understand how does Node Port actually differs, right? This is what is the part you want to understand, differ from ClusterIP. What is the difference between the two? I want to go back to this picture, writing that I have here. So here the ClusterIP means that from within the cluster you can access your service. That's what it all means. You cannot from my computer access the service unless you do some port forwarding or some tunneling, like some kind of networking you have established, by which you can actually talk from my computer to all the way to Kubernetes ports. Okay, because if you have noticed, Kubernetes ports actually running on a different network, right? So how do you know? skipctl get ports, and if I do this, I know this network is different from my computer network. So what I wanted to show you, this is basically a different IP address than the one my computer. So it's running on 192.68. blah blah, right? So they don't know how to talk to each other. There is no networking established. When you actually do the node type, what is going to happen is that this functionality, the ClusterIP functionality, is going to be embedded or going to be baked in to node port type already. In addition, what you could do is basically is going to expose the service. We are talking about the node ports. So node ports are basically the cluster node. So we are talking about this node. So minikube node list, we have two nodes, right? So we are talking about these two nodes, right? And then the particular port. So there we would be able to access. If you have not understood yet, you would understand in a second. I have a picture for you. ClusterIP and Node Port. Now I wanted to show you this image. Right. So I want to show you this image. This is copied from the internet. I didn't want to actually make the image for you guys, but I was thinking I could really explain to you what this means. So side by side, let me explain to you what they mean. If you look at this, you can see this part is basically same in here, right? So traffic comes in and then traffic goes to SVC. SVC does the service discovery and is going to forward the traffic to its backend ports, right? That's how the service request is basically handled. So directly in our case, service was what? Service was basically those endpoints, right? Right here, if you look here, we are talking about the service, but this time we have the node. So we are talking about primary or worker node, doesn't really matter. So I'm talking about this node. So minikube node. So this time, actually we are accessing the service on its IP address in this particular port, meaning that here our service is actually exposed. But in here, that is not the case. In here, you would not be able to do so. From this computer, I'm actually curling this endpoint, which is basically the other computer, right? And here, on its own server where service is running, we are able to actually access it. But in terms of cluster IP, this is not the case. We can only access the cluster from within the cluster, but here is actually accessing the service. You can say exposing the service, the external expose, you can say in this way. Because let's say if someone, let's say there is a computer number 4 with the IP address or 10, let's say your friend is using, but who is not part of the Kubernetes cluster, right? Meaning that these two computers are part of Kubernetes cluster. So if someone else in my private network, right, go to his browser and type in, he would be able to access it. So this is why service is actually exposed outside of the cluster. Remember, Because now what we are doing, we are actually accessing the service from within the cluster. Is because I actually SSH'd to this part, right? But if someone, let's say your friend has a computer connecting to the same network, what he's gonna do, he's gonna type your IP address, private IP address, right? He would be still able to ping, and he's gonna say 30611, and he will be able to access your service. So that's the core difference between the two. In the next video, I'll be talking about load balancer. If I do minikube SSH, I'm going to SSH to my master node. Okay, so here you can see host name, my hands are frozen, I can't really type. So you can see the IP address is basically this one. So what I mean, so now if I curl, before I do the curl, I need to know this one. So kubectl get endpoint. So I know this is the endpoint where my service is basically exposed, right? So if I go here and I curl, we should be able to access it. So this is number one port, right? And the other port is basically having this particular endpoint, right? Exposing the service in there. So if I'm now saying curl this, so we are actually able to access our service, right? So, and then the other thing we could do is basically the cluster IP. So I have to go kubectl, oh no, I don't have to type it as we see. So if I'm doing this, you can see cluster IP. This is where my service is also exposed, right? You can see. So this is what by the cluster IP you can do. So now the only difference actually it makes now is this node IP. Talking about node IP of this computer. Node IP of this computer is what? Let's say this, right? So this, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna say curl, and this time I'm gonna say host name. My hands are completely frozen. And here this time, if you are following me along in this video, what is happening here is basically this is the port where the service is actually exported on the node port. So node port is basically we are talking about the IP address of this computer. Before we were not able to actually access it with cluster IP, right? So here if I'm, so let me see what was the port number, 3611. So 3611. If I'm doing this, actually you can see I'm able to access the service. Before we were not able to access with the cluster IP. So now if I go to the other computer, IP address of the other computer, so minikube node list, and we know that this is the IP address of the other computer. So if I'm trying to curl and this one, and I know the port number 611, look at this, we are from this node, actually we can access the service which is exposed on the other node. So that's the difference, meaning that node port means on a specific IP address, right? On a specific port, your service is exposed, and this node is part of your cluster, right? So in our case, one node is basically we talked about it, we are repeating ourselves right here. So one node is basically, this is the control plane node, which is basically the minikube, is named minikube, and the other one is basically called M02, is working as a worker node. So this is basically the difference between the. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you have any questions, please do not hesitate, and if you have not subscribed to my channel yet, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. That's how you can help me to grow my channel. Thank you everyone, bye bye, and talk to you soon.